Illegals everywhere. Oh, and drugs, those too. President Joe likely would have seen both had he actually visited the southern border instead of just showing up in his usual state of bewilderment before snapping a few photos and heading out. You know, it's a shame too because they even cleaned up the migrant encampments in El Paso to cleanse the optics. That was a giant waste of time and resources. But unlike Joe, I've been to the southern border on several occasions, and rather than stand there for a few photos and nod my head, I went to do what Joe should have done, learn from those who actually do the now impossible work of securing it. And that's how I met my next guest, former Border Patrol Chief Rodney Scott. All right, Rodney, so I follow you on social media, and I love how honest you are about everything. Obviously, I see you on Fox News all the time as well. Finally liberated so you can talk about everything that this administration is doing to absolutely F up everything that the Trump administration did. But I want to start with that border visit. You know, now he can say he's been to the border, but do you think he really saw anything?
Absolutely not. I mean, if you watch any of the news, they sanitized El Paso before he ever got there. It was only 3 hours. And you personally know when we toured in San Diego, you've got to get out and look around a little bit and have some real conversations to understand what's going on. And clearly he doesn't understand what's going on. I don't believe he spoke to actually any agents on the line, spent much more of his time at a port, which is important, and then NGOs. But I don't think anything's going to come out of it. I don't think he learned anything new, to be honest.
No, and I don't think he wanted to, quite frankly. And again, when any of these Biden officials or any of these congressional Democrats, anytime they talk about the border and they even refer to it as a crisis, I don't believe that they're shocked as to the fact that it's happening or how we got here or what it would take to actually secure the border. I think this is by design. But what do you think when you see states like Texas putting shipping containers as makeshift barriers? I mean, having to essentially construct their own wall just to have a baseline barrier to protect the country this administration refuses to protect.
Yeah, it's horrible. I do a lot of work with Texas now. I actually even went down and helped them do an evaluation of Operation Lone Star, the effectiveness, how to improve it. If you look at those numbers, I think every one of your viewers, everybody out in America needs to understand when Texas basically reveals how many people they've encountered, those would have been gotaways. So Texas is basically, they went to the Border Patrol and said, hey, how do you secure the border? And then they understood barriers. So not only did they put up those shipping containers, but they're also building actual border wall, the exact same design that the U.S. Border Patrol had come up with, that we were building along the southwest border, because they know that it keeps Texans safe. The horrible part is now America's paying for it twice, especially Texans. We already paid for our via taxes and all the money that was appropriated for the border wall and the technology before. And then now Texas is going back and having to basically reappropriate new money to do what was already supposed to be done. The shipping containers aren't the answer to world hunger, but at least they help slow down cross-border illegal traffic and slow down those bonsais of massive people coming across through those areas.
So I was actually in Arizona, I guess it was a couple of years now, kind of right at the start of the Biden administration, and I saw pieces of border wall and equipment that had already been funded for border wall sitting there and rusting. And we're talking millions and millions of dollars worth of wall that just sat there because the Biden administration wanted to send a virtue signal. But even as we know how important the physical barriers are, you and I spent a lot of time looking at wall prototypes when I was in San Diego several years ago, but none of it really matters how great your barriers are. You can have a moat filled with alligators if you want. If the Biden administration is opening the door saying, just come on through here, we'll process you and release you into the country, it doesn't matter how tall your wall is or how much barbed wire you put on it. It doesn't really matter when the policy is what it is.
That's 100% accurate. Thank you for bringing that up, Tommy, because some of the legislation that's being pushed currently, even by the right, it funnels money to the Border Patrol and it funnels some technology, they call it. But if you look closely, it's all focused on expediting how quickly they process people and release them into the United States. The problem we have today is a policy problem. As long as this administration really focuses on catch and release, very intentionally catching and releasing people into the U.S. as quickly as possible, there's no barrier on the planet that's going to slow them down. And the cartels, by the way, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring this in there. We talk about all the time that the illegal aliens. This administration does talk about there being a humanitarian crisis, and they talk about how we don't want people sleeping on the streets of El Paso. They never talk about actual border security. And they never talk about how the cartels are systematically using these massive numbers of people that Biden invited to America to overwhelm law enforcement create systematic gaps in border security. And then they're bringing across the heroin, the fentanyl, the cocaine, the criminals that are willing to pay more to not encounter a Border Patrol agent. And if you think that a terrorist is knowingly going to walk up and surrender to Border Patrol, you're insane. Yet we caught 96 people last year on the National Terrorist Watch List. I think it's up to like 100 and almost 120 now coming into this year. That's a real threat that this administration refuses to acknowledge.
No, it certainly is. And you're right, Border Patrol agents, even back during the Trump administration was when he was getting so much criticism for his zero tolerance policy. I mean, that's when I visited you, when he was saying we need to secure this border, we're going to do it. And then everyone was in an uproar. AOC went down and she cried at the wall and she cried at the cages that Obama set up, all this. And he was saying, no, we're going to actually fix this problem. And he was well on his way to doing just that. I mean, I went several times during the Trump administration and it was almost crickets. We didn't really even see a whole lot of activity because people were not incentivized to come over. But even when I was with you, your agents were still microwaving burritos and handing out blankets. I mean, they were still babysitters. I can't imagine what agents are dealing with now. Of those that you still keep in regular contact with, what do they deal with on a daily basis?
The morale of the U.S. Border Patrol is just tanked. Like, I don't know that it could go much lower and have people still show up for work, to be quite honest. The vast majority of them are doing exactly what you just stated. The cartels push over these huge groups of people. And again, if anybody out there has the courage to get into debates with individuals on the left, and they keep talking about these asylum seekers, why would you, if you're going to claim asylum, why would you wait until like 2 a.m. to cross the raging Rio Grande River in December when it's freezing cold, or go out into the middle of the desert in Arizona? It's because the cartel controls all of that. So the cartel watches how many agents are on duty. They push across enough illegal aliens to overwhelm them. And then the Border Patrol agents are stuck inside processing the rest of the shift. The cartel gets to do whatever they want. So here's the thing. The Biden administration may not want to talk about it, but the agents know that when they're overwhelmed like that the cartel's bringing in serious threats to their family and this country, and they feel helpless to do anything about it, even though that was their mission. And that's the frustration that you're seeing within Border Patrol today. And it's just getting worse because they don't see this administration talking about border security in any meaningful way.
No, and they don't care. And you're right. We need to stop this funding to DHS until we secure the border, because throwing more money at the problem is actually exacerbating the problem. They get more money to work with. They move people through quicker, but it doesn't solve the problem. I want to talk as well about Biden's new policy of allowing 30,000 folks from, Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela to come over, and they get this like temporary asylum. They get on temporary parole. What's that all about, and what's that going to do?
First and foremost, there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program. So don't buy into that. It's all smoke and mirrors. Secondly, the numbers just don't add up. If you look at 280,000 encounters U.S. Border Patrol had just in November of this last year, 30,000, really? It's not going to make a drop in the bucket. And the people have already indicated that they're not going to wait in line. And by the way, that 30,000 number, from what I understand, was decided by Mexico, not by the United States. They basically, part of the agreement, they said, hey, we'll take back 30,000 if you let 30,000 in. Since when do we give other countries the ability to decide who and what comes into this nation? Under the Trump administration, whether people like it or not, he understood, and the last administration understood, that Mexico is a little bit different. And I'm not criticizing them, it's just reality. We talk about like different sayings and we joke around about them, like silver or lead. But that's a saying in Mexico that's really true because the cartels have so much control. So the last administration, Trump, made it more beneficial or more painful, if you will, to not work with the U.S. than to work with us. This administration walked away from all of that. This program, it's just another signal to the world that there's a million different ways to get into the United States illegally now. So why the heck should I bother waiting in line and doing it legally?
Yeah, nobody's going to do that. Why would anybody? When you see all these people cutting in line, even if you are just coming over here to work, you're not going to wait in that line. But now even the Florida Keys is being absolutely bombarded by these individuals. Ron DeSantis is having to activate the National Guard to go try to stem that tide, but it's never going to stop. I mean, being what our country is and how much border we have, I don't see any way to stop a full-blown, and I call it an invasion, at any part of our border whatsoever, because everybody's coming.
Yeah, so you hit the nail on that too. It's the United States Border Patrol, not the Southwest Border Patrol. We've had problems on the northern border with different crime forever. We have a great partner in Canada that we can work with a little bit more above board, if you will, than Mexico. But this highlighting the migrants in Florida is another good example. Border Patrol was already completely busy 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So were the CBP officers at the ports of entry. And going back to that new program, we didn't even talk about the fact that those 30,000 are going to be processed at ports of entry. That means that CBP officer that was supposed to be processing legal trade and travel, people doing it the right way, reducing the backlog of the supply chain, are now being diverted to process more illegal aliens into this country. This is a national threat. The border wall was making every single Border Patrol agent more effective along that southwest border so that resources could be surged to these other areas where we weren't going to build a wall around Florida, for example. But the thing is that we had a holistic border security plan, a playbook, if you will. Biden threw it out. His administration took every single thing they could find that we've developed in the last 4 years before them, and they threw it out for no reason other than the fact that they hated the prior administration. None of it makes sense.
Well, that, and they really don't mind if we have millions of illegal aliens coming into this country because they want to bolster census numbers and get more Democrat representatives. Last thing I want to talk to you about, though, is Gavin Newsom, because I know you obviously spent a lot of time in California. Gavin Newsom was your governor, was my governor for several years. He took a trip to the border about a month ago, and he said, oh, it's a problem here, and California is having to do the work because the federal government isn't, and it's all Republicans' fault. When Gavin Newsom says something like that, from the time that you spend in California and probably even working with Governor Newsom at some point in time, what do you make of his little trip and what his plans would be? Should he potentially be, I don't know, the president in 2024?
Man, so much just went through my mind right now that I'm not even going to put on words. But yeah, that guy can't be trusted in any way, shape, or form. Guess who he didn't talk to when he went down for his little photo op? The U.S. Border Patrol, U.S. Customs and Border Protection. He pushed through a sanctuary state law while I was the chief out in San Diego that completely devastated task forces that were working on counter narcotics up and down the border up and down the coast, because that's also a border. And we had great relationships with state and locals. And basically they pushed through this sanctuary state law that destroyed all those task forces. The last time he went down to the border was when I was still chief, not this time, but probably before. I was still the chief in San Diego sector. He had just become the governor. And it took me about a couple of months and working a lot of backdoor channels to get him to even come to the border. Part of the deal was there couldn't be any cameras. We wouldn't do any social media, but I gave him a pretty good briefing and he acknowledged many of the things I told him. First and foremost, that border wall in San Diego made both San Diego and Tijuana safer. It makes both communities safer because law and order attracts people and businesses. But anyway, he then, like not 10 minutes later, he went and did another video, blew off everything I said and made fun of the border wall, said San Diego is super secure, even though he was sitting north of 2 border walls and about 1,000 Border Patrol agents and CBP officers. He said that, Trump's border security was dumb, basically, and it was not needed. You can't trust anything that guy says. Look at his track record of actually destroying that state. That's what we should pay attention to.
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody can tell you that. Yeah, anybody that's had any experience with Gavin Newsom could tell you that. But boy, does he put on a good show. Rodney, thank you for everything that you do and for being so vocal. I obviously follow you on social media, see you on Fox all the time, and I'm so happy when I do see you. And it's so great to reconnect with you. And please, to all those Border Patrol agents, you know how much I love Border Patrol. Please send them my love, my support. I wish this administration would let me go down for another tour, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. So maybe when we get a new administration.
They won't let anybody go. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, they definitely will not. The Trump administration was happy to have me there, and I obviously got to do several tours with Border Patrol, but as soon as Biden came into office, they said that wasn't appropriate anymore. So maybe one day, and thank you so much for everything that you've taught me. I use it really every single day, so I appreciate all that information.
Thank you for keeping the fight going out there, and hey, 2025 can't come fast enough.
Exactly.